Blog Talk Radio.
Tonight on Salamone, we're talking current events and anything else that comes to mind. With a great panel. Joining me tonight will be Kyle Burnett, Jane Fisher, friend of the show, Quincy Worthington, maybe a couple other guests. I don't know yet. We're going to talk about what's going on in the world, maybe some other things, crack some jokes, maybe even get to the heart of some of these issues. I don't know what'll happen. This is a live show. And well, thanks for tuning in. Yeah, thanks for tuning in, everybody. We've got another great panel for you this week. Joining me tonight is improv guru and public health advocate Jane Fisher, filmmaker, podcaster, and security expert as well, Kyle Burnett, and my spirit animal, friend of the show, Reverend Quincy Danger Worthington. Hey, thanks for being here, everyone. I made a joke this week that basically civilization stopped in 1990 for hammer time, and we've never quite got it started again. With so much going on in the world, we can't hit on every topic, but I feel that civilization is at stake, so we've got to try and get to as much as we can. I listened to the live stream of the Ferguson town halls tonight, and I'm pretty fired up about it. The news you get from these live streams and on Twitter is just so much different than what the big corporate media guys are reporting, and a racist by any other name is still a Fox News correspondent. But anyhow, despite how emotional this was, the town hall gave me a lot of hope, because a surefire way for people to make a difference in their community is kind of to badger their elected officials at every public meeting. But Jane, I know you've been following this story like I have using alternate media. I was hoping maybe you'd give us a bit of your insight. So what's up, girl?
Hey, how you doing? You know, I didn't watch the town hall tonight, but what I was struck by just through the whole thing was the tendency, of course, to take one person, one action, one sentence, one moment in time, and all of a sudden extrapolate that to make these assumptions that are so broad-reaching that it lost the moment in time. It lost the meaning of the saying. It lost the meaning of the individual reality, trying to make it apply to a culture, a neighborhood, a race, a gender, a economic class level, etc. And that's, you know, my old social minor that I'm still paying off, you know, that whole thing is just, we lose the story. You know, we lose the individual stories. We're a nation of stories, and we lose the story when we just say, well, that applies to everyone, and that means this. And that, to me, was the most frustrating. And so I love the alternative media talking to the individuals and having those isolated moments that you felt like you were there. That's the way to get the news, man.
Yeah, this climate of talking points and, like you said, kind of trying to pigeonhole everything into a stereotype, we're losing a lot of the dialogue. And thankfully, if the fourth estate is failing us, there's this alternate medium that's coming to rise to the occasion, I guess. One of the things that I really wanted to talk about tonight, but a couple of the guys that I wanted to be here on this topic who were like military guys just couldn't do it last minute. But they have kind of echoed some of the stuff we've seen on like the comedy news shows of how the police are using military gear inappropriately, that they're inadequately trained if they're pointing guns in people's faces and driving tanks down the streets during protests. Kyle, you've got experience in law enforcement and security, and I haven't had a chance to talk to you about these issues, so I'm really curious. What's your take on that aspect of this story?
Well, I completely agree with that. You know, in all the training that I received and all the training that I did, the first thing that we learned was you never point your weapon at somebody unless you intend to use it. So when we saw the images and the video of them, you know, holding their rifles in a ready position, that's does not echo any of the training that we received. And when you're given that type of equipment, there's a responsibility that comes with them. There's a responsibility to know how to use it, and I think that was majorly overlooked in this case.
It's frightening to see. Even here, I'm in Denver, Colorado, and our protests to show solidarity, the Hands Up, Don't Shoot movement here in Denver, were greeted by SWAT team police. And we didn't have any incidents or anything like that, but it was still kind of scary to see, like, this is the world we live in. I remember many, many years ago when the Broncos won a Super Bowl, coming out of the pub that we were watching the game at and immediately getting tear gassed by police and tactical gear. So it's not a new issue by any means, but it's definitely one that we need to talk about right now because of all these stories, not just Mike Brown. Quincy, you're a pastor, which makes you a community leader by default. I'm really curious, if your parish were in Ferguson, what would you be doing? What would you be preaching, and what kind of activities would you have to be engaged in?
Well, that's a loaded question. I would hope that I'm preaching the gospel, which is the same thing I think I'm doing here 4.5 hours away. However, what that looks like might be different. And I think, one of the best things that churches can do, and pastors especially can do, is utilize the pulpit as a mouthpiece for the community. And not only the community, but, I hate to say a mouthpiece for God, but, I'm a firm believer. Dr. King taught it. I think Augustine was the one who originally said it, but justice, injustice anywhere threatens justice everywhere. And if we're talking about building a just community, that's what you need to do. And I'm proud of my brothers and sisters in Christ who stood with the protesters and not against them. And, we heard of church raids going on because they were supplying equipment to help people get tear gas out of their eyes. And I would hope that whatever faith community I served was doing something like that. But then also providing dialogue so it's not one-sided and it's not just a protest, but that there would be some kind of dialogue between law enforcement and the protesters going on and help facilitate constructive conversation. But I don't know how open one side was to that.
Well, I think from the footage I see, again, from like the live streams and then following on Twitter, it's kind of cool to see how active the churches are feeding protesters, giving them showers. And you see like these images of like these old ladies who are pastors hand in hand with these anonymous guys in their Guy Fawkes masks. And it really does kind of, to me, say there's something important going on here that we need to pay attention to.
I was going to say, I think what I was disappointed about was if you read Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham County jail, it was just as poignant today as it was 50 years ago because there was a lot of clergy stepping up saying, don't protest, don't cause a racket. Now's not the time.
Well, civil rights as an issue is more important today, or as important today as any point in history, and not just for minorities or cultures, but for homosexuals, for women. So I think there's a lot of value to all of us maybe taking a page and reading some Dr. King and trying to find where we are in our hearts on these topics. But I do want to move on. Speaking of our tax dollars funding brutality and abuse of power, the NFL has been all over the news, and not the opening week of their season. But Kyle, you're the biggest football fan on the panel, and I'd like to give you first words on the topic as a fan. When you hear these kind of stories coming through, like this Rice story, where's your heart? What are your thoughts?
Well, I am a diehard football fan, have been my whole life. I played for a while, not in the NFL, unfortunately, but as a football fan and a lover of the game, I think what happened today should have happened a month ago when it first came out. There shouldn't have been a 2-game suspension. There should have been no question. There shouldn't have been I'm glad that they strengthened the policies afterwards, but I think beforehand, right when it should have happened, or right when it happened, it should have been, the policy should have been changed, and Ray Rice should have been thrown out of the NFL, and full charges pressed, because they shouldn't have waited for, the video that came out, was it this morning or yesterday morning or whatever. I think it should have, these people are paid because we watch them. Because they're put on a pedestal, and if they're going to be put on a pedestal, then they should act like they're put on a pedestal, and if they can't do that and they can't be a good influence, then they shouldn't be allowed to be on that pedestal, and they should just be removed from their position.
I think that NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell, who has a house in my hometown, and Missouri Governor Jay Nixon, they should become best friends because they share an incompetency for dealing with violent offenders that is just beyond comprehension to me. But Jane, you have worked on the issue of domestic violence quite a bit. Why don't you drop some knowledge on us?
Well, to me, I think what we're not talking about here is the larger culture of violence in which the NFL exists and in which we exist. And the NFL is just one sort of microcosm within that. And how do we look at I'm going to say men here, because statistically speaking, more men are perpetrators of domestic violence and more women are victims. But let me say, absolutely there are female offenders and male victims. Absolutely. But I'm going to speak statistically and because this is a male perpetrator and a female victim.
Sure.
I feel like we need to talk about masculinity and violence. I think that's something that we're afraid to talk about. And I think it goes back to what I mentioned with Ferguson, is that if we dare talk about that, it becomes this sort of, you're talking about me, you're accusing me. It's really talking about what are we teaching men about coping mechanisms, about handling anger, about being men. When are we going to have that conversation? And what are we teaching women about what it means to be a real woman? And women are taught at an early age to base a lot of their value on the existence and quality of a relationship. And men are taught to obtain a lot of their value on status and power. How does that directly connect on what we've been talking about all day today? And I think this really came to a head because there happened to be a camera. And in many of these cases, there's no camera. There's no camera in the house, in the car. My God, those pictures of his wife to put her next to him at that press conference was one of the worst things that you could do to a victim. She's got to stand there and sit there and defend him. What do you expect her to say? I think we need to talk about the culture as a whole, in addition to the NFL being a major perpetrator of that culture.
Quincy, I'd like to hear your take on especially those gender issues that Jane just raised, but of this whole culture of violence, machismo, et cetera. I'm sure you've got thoughts on it, so go ahead.
I'm not sure what I could add that hasn't been said. I think they're both spot on. I just think it's appalling. I really do.
For me, those points are also poignant, and I also just hate any time that we see the victim on display or blamed. And I feel like when I was getting the news on this, I unfortunately watched some Fox News, and I watched a little bit of ESPN online, and I felt like this is my impression of them as if Jeffrey Dahmer were a professional athlete. Those people were asking to be cannibalized. They were really kind of blaming the victim. And I don't know if it's the right wing or just the media defending a major sponsor, but this rushing to defend domestic violence hurt me as just a citizen, as a human being. So remember, kids listening, if you're assaulted by a police officer or a pro athlete, that's acceptable in the culture now. So just chill out.
There you go.
The other big news out today was the Big Apple talk, and that was all over the news. Personally, I admire the balls of any company asking to secure your credit cards and financial information right after being blamed for being insecure of your nude photographs. I think that's just fantastic hubris. But so they had announcements about the new phone and watches and all these things. But I'd rather talk about the celebrity nudes from last week because the cloud is at the center of the issue here, and I feel horrible for the victims. These are private moments meant to be kept private. But isn't it weird there weren't any dick pics? I mean, every woman I know who's active online is swimming in dick pics. They could build a house from all the wood from these dick pics that are privately messaged to them, and there's no dick pic. Anyhow, Kyle, you're an aspiring filmmaker and, again, an expert in security. Any advice to people who are keeping stuff on the cloud? I mean, not just aspiring entertainers, but the courting rituals of our day. I mean, it's commonplace to have some naked photos. What, from a security standpoint, is your advice?
Well, like, I don't want to say don't take the pictures, because, I mean, it's absolutely their right. I don't think the blame lies anywhere in that realm. I think it lies in the provider that said, if you take a picture with our phone or use our service, your stuff will be secure. I think we should not have a knee-jerk reaction to this and just stop living our lives the way we want to live our lives. We should stop buying products that just don't care. Like you said, this happened, and then they turn around and say, well, we've got this new products. These new products that base everything off that cloud. I myself, as you know, have been, the biggest Apple advocate there was since the first Apple product I bought, 12 years ago. But I just recently got rid of my iPhone right before this happened, and I just feel like they just don't care anymore. And I think this is a great example of, the news reports are saying that these hacks have been happening over a matter of months, possibly, a year or two, and they'd never noticed. They'd never noticed that information was going, and then all of a sudden this guy makes this huge information dump, and now it's a big story. How come they didn't notice that this was happening before? So any company that's going to allow this sort of thing to happen, I can't support anymore.
From what I've read, I think it's important to advocate for the two-form security checks online, like when you have to get a text code, and these little things that are a pain in the butt, because this particular hack, my understanding is, they did the I forgot my password trick, and
right.
That's how they got access. So I think as consumers, whether we're on the iCloud or Dropbox or whatever, it's just important to really use secure passwords and to use the two-form identity clearance. Jane, you're a woman and an entertainer. You've got to have some thoughts on this topic.
Well, I'm also apparently like 3/4 Amish, because I am one of the people left in this world who I do not have a smartphone. I have a sweet Samsung flip phone, baby. It is fantastic, and it takes pictures with the quality of things that don't take pictures. But it takes a picture, but you can't see it, so whatever. But it's so yeah. In some ways, I have to go to the what are the English doing with their strange devices? But I do banking online and stuff, so I think about it that way. It's I'm not crazy, I don't have the password and the all that kind of stuff. But and I've never done the whole sexting kind of thing, because nobody would want to see that. That's just foolish, and so I'm sort of out of it in that sense of like I can't relate to the urge to be like, oh, I look sweet right now, I got to snap me some of me, because that's just not where I'm coming from, But I think about like some of the guys that I'm reading online, because when you read Twitter, I love Twitter. Sometimes there's some great sharing on there, and sometimes I'm like, oh, dear God. And the people that are just like, oh, it's out there, and, it's just out there, and not you, but like some scary people with they're trying to have intelligent conversations when it's just like dicks for you kind of handles, and they're like, well, what do you expect to happen? I'm going to take it. You put it out there, and it's like, all right, Johnny, so if you've gone to Home Depot and bought your sweet lumber for the weekend, they got hacked. Guess you shouldn't have run your Bubba's Visa, and I guess I get your numbers. You went and you made the transaction, so I get your numbers, baby. I'm going to buy lumber in your name, dicks for you. I'm going to build a shed.
I feel like
then
you
I'm going
missed
to go
a
take
good
pictures of myself in
there.
Well, that's for everyone to play.
Why didn't we have this conversation with the whole Anthony Weiner thing?
Well,
granted, it wasn't like a hacking situation, but it's like, he shared that photo with a woman, in private, and she went out and...
No, he wasn't in private, though. He accidentally sent it publicly.
Yeah. Right. Oh.
So he accidentally sent it to his followers. So there's a whole big...
What an idiot.
Yeah, exactly.
Never mind.
Carlos Danger took that upon himself. So, I mean,
Massaging the voters.
I do feel like it's a privacy issue for him as well because it was so well covered.
Well, not anymore.
He made the mistake.
Yeah. Well.
He made the mistake. So these women never tried to share this with anybody but their significant others, and even, I don't know. I mean, I think it was Patton Oswalt who said this week, and it couldn't be put any better, in my opinion. There are plenty of beautiful people on the internet who want you to see them naked. Like,
yes.
You don't need to betray these people's privacy.
Yes.
Anyhow.
And if you've gone for the internet and you've seen every picture, you need a hobby. Get outside. Vitamin D, scurvy. You know, it's maybe somebody has seen every porn image. I don't know.
Some of us are really, really lonely.
And that's coming from our minister. Thank you.
Aww.
I didn't mean me. I just meant there are some people. I watch Star Trek reruns. I mean, I'm more interested in that than porn, and that's even sadder. But that's another topic.
I have Google image searched for Beverly Crusher topless. I'll admit it.
And I have not for Shatner topless, so we're even.
Next topic, please.
For a lot of people. Yeah, I'm moving on. It was back to school week for a lot of people, especially college students. I thought a kind of a fun little game to play is to go around and give some back-to-school advice from each of our guests. So I'll go first. I've said this before. If you're just starting out in college, really I think the best thing you can do, sure, buckle down in your studies, but binge drink and be as promiscuous as possible. That's how you make friends for life. Let's move on to Quincy. Do you have any back-to-school advice for any listeners?
Yeah, and I'm actually going to take this one kind of seriously since I'm a father of 4 kids who have just gone back to school, and I'd give the same advice that my father gave me that I think has paid off in spades, which might be similar to yours, but it's my dad always told me to find the one kid who nobody was hanging out with or who was alone at recess or lunch and be their friend, and that's the best advice I could give anybody, really.
Kyle, you're also a parent of a myriad of ages. How about what was your back-to-school advice?
Well, just to address what Quincy just said, I was that kid that nobody hung out with. And I would have given anything for somebody to come over and sit with me, anything. So perfect advice. My advice is very similar, and it's something that I try to instill in my children, that it's not the quantity of the friend, but the quality of the friend. And it's not just what you think about them, but what they think about you. And you should never change what you think about yourself to impress them. And I'm very proud that my children live by that. And, I've got a daughter who considers herself a nerd and a book geek. And she, for years, thought about changing that because it didn't work out for her. And now she's got just the most loyal friends that all have the same interests because she stuck to that. And, so my advice would just be to continue being the person that you are and don't change because the mass thinks it's the right thing to do.
I think what these guys said is great advice for not back to school, but all of life. But Jane, you're up.
Well, I work with a lot of college kids and students, I should say. So I could go on for longer than you have time allowed, but the first one I'll say is look up when you're texting and crossing a street and or going up or down a flight of stairs.
Amen.
Because
Amen.
I usually it's like Frogger with less interesting characters most of the time driving around campus because there's just everything's a crosswalk, and they're not going to see me coming. And because they're LOLing somebody, and then going up the stairs, I have a hard enough time just without looking straight ahead and not falling downstairs. I don't know how they're texting and walking up or downstairs, but so stop doing that, please. But on a semi-serious note, too, I see so much. I just saw an article that won't bore you with, but it basically came out saying there was a study done, and so many students have come out of college lately having not learned any critical thinking skills after 4 years, when colleges are saying that they're instilling this. And what I see is cramming and recitation and memorization. And it's just this sort of how many facts can I blurt out and recite? And I don't see sort of that, how can I apply this in my life, much less my career? I would say actually try to learn stuff instead of just memorize stuff. That makes a big difference in your life. And thirdly, coming from the Amish lady with no camera phone, I would say remember that the internet is forever, so those pictures at that party might last you beyond your freshman year. And
we didn't have that.
Right.
So we've only got about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to jump in here to just really quick because I want to make sure that we mention Joan Rivers' passing because I'm a giant Joan Rivers fan. Her stand-up is as edgy as anybody out there. For me, it's her and Don Rickles, and at their ages of all things, the most cutting-edge stuff in comedy, still pushing the envelope, still pushing the boundaries, never apologizing because of her unwavering belief that jokes were the ultimate in free speech. Loved her. So just big props to Joan Rivers for all the work she did. They keep saying for women, but really for comedy. We don't have much time, but does anybody want to say anything about Joan really quick?
I would agree, and I just think it's a shame that didn't have a chance to for her to thank everybody for her life and for everybody to thank her. I think that's kind of sad.
Yeah, she wanted to die on stage, so I'm sad that she didn't get that last wish. Anyhow, that's pretty much our show, so I want to thank everybody who tuned in or will tune in, and a big thanks to all of our guests. This is such a great panel. You can visit michaelsalamone.com/podcast for our archives. There's a new live show every Tuesday night. I'm so thrilled that people are listening. Lastly, Quincy, tell our listeners about Rev Pipes, our sponsor for this episode.
Oh, yeah. My friend John Jensen makes these amazing tobacco pipes, and they are tobacco pipes for smoking tobacco. They're made out of wood, briar. They're beautiful. Check him out at Rev's Pipes. He's on Facebook. They're miraculous.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, everybody. Be really good to each other. And my guests tonight, thank you again so much. And good night.